That's the problem in this country. We leave them to breed on the streets and then we get trouble.
He is armed and is considered to be highly dangerous.
America, the land of the free, home of the brave, and the stupid, and the criminally insane. The United States has seen its fair share of gangbangers, mobsters, and psychotics who've roamed our beloved streets causing untold chaos, destruction, and corruption. Tonight, on a special Halloween edition of A Criminal History, a madman manhunt. Violence, madness, and death. Tonight's criminal history is not for the faint of heart or the weak of stomach, and though our investigators and writers have done their utmost to keep the details of tonight's atrocities to a manageable minimum, it is worth noting that we will be covering some of the most heinous and outright horrible acts of debaucherous murder that the United States has ever seen. You have been warned. We will see botched executions, voyeuristic sadism enabled by absurd wealth, and the death of many, many violent criminals, as we document the criminal history of a truly awful man, given an unlikely second chance, James Earl Cash. A criminal history brought to you by my incredible supporters on Patreon, and a special thank you to my executive producer tier patrons, Visceral, Ezra Hambrick, and Mason Collin. If you want to support the channel, one of the best ways you can do it is by joining the Patreon and supporting those who support me. All patrons at all tiers receive access to all perks listed on the screen for only $2 Canadian a month, or less than $2 American a month. But for those extra generous few who decide to pledge at the executive producer tier level, you can also promote your own content. Today's episode is sponsored in part by executive producers Ezra Hambrick and Mason Collin. You can check out Ezra's YouTube channel, ScottGames99, where they play games like Red Dead Redemption 2, MLB The Show 22, Vice City Definitive Edition, and more, as well as Mason Collins' podcast channel, We're About Everything, where they discuss, well, everything, from zombie apocalypses to game remasters and more. Support the show by showing them some love, and without further ado, enjoy today's episode. Our story tonight takes place primarily in the dingy, poorly lit streets of America's Rust Belt. Specifically, Carcer City, which some of the state's loudest journalists have argued may have even given the nearby Liberty City a run for its money in terms of violence. We attempted to find records on James Earl Cash's early life by prying various city officials for information, but unfortunately, and likely due to the events we are about to describe tonight, almost all tangible records on Mr. Cash have been lost, altered, or destroyed. As a result, we cannot tell you much about Cash's early life at all, other than that, like all of us, he did have a family, possibly even a wife and children of his own, though we couldn't come to any concrete conclusions regarding this. However Cash spent his early life, it would eventually lead him down the path of becoming a heinous and murderous criminal. By the year 2000, he would be locked up in Darkwoods Penitentiary and placed on death row, meaning at some point he must have been convicted of murder. Once again, details of his time inside of the awful institution are sparse and hard to confirm. What needs little confirmation is that 3 years later, in November of 2003, James Earl Cash would be scheduled to die, and at least according to state records initially, and news reports from the following day, die is exactly what he would do. He would be given a lethal injection, and likely thought himself already dead when he awoke to find himself in what probably felt like just another bad dream.
Hey, tough guy, wake up. You're not dead. Well, not yet, anyway. You're getting a second chance. Another throw of the dice. As far as the world is concerned, you died back in the chamber. Justice was served. James Earl Cash is rotting in hell. that's the way you're gonna want it, because I'm your only way out of here. Hey, easy. Look, you've had an unexpected reprieve. Do exactly as I say, and I promise this will be over before the night is out.
In reality, Cash had been injected not with a lethal drug meant to kill him, but instead a common sedative, and then carted away by prison staff on the payroll of his new auditory companion, film director Lionel Starkweather, although to Cash, for now, he would be known simply as the Voice, or the Director. Cash would awaken in Carcer Mark, territory of one of the main gangs of hoodlums who had at that time overrun much of the city's poorer neighborhoods, with the coffee and donut shop he found himself in being deep inside the territory of the Hoods. The Hoods are a group of loosely organized street thugs, part-time or former police officers, and other small-time criminals. With control over Carcer Mark, a largely abandoned and heavily dilapidated neighborhood, they aren't exactly the best equipped or most intelligent of gangs who prowl over Carcer City's perimeter. Being that they are loud, boisterous, and oftentimes reckless, they obviously seemed like a perfect criminal litmus test for Cash to Starkweather, in search of his perfect snuff film, and thus, they would be the first targets. Starkweather would guide a bleary-eyed Cash to his first victims, and slowly reveal the rules of the sick game he'd set up, with his connections in nearly every media organization across the city. Footage obtained from Mr. Starkweather's highly illegal surveillance operation has been obtained and will continue to be shown in this documentary, though its use comes at a great cost to our investigative team, who have been hyper-paranoid ever since its acquisition.
These streets are being patrolled by gangs. They're scum, just like you. And they're here to hunt you down and cut you up. I'll try to direct you as best I can, but other than that, you're on your own. It's up to you. Okay, are you ready? Camera, action. Now just take your time, Cash. I see a few hoods around these vans. Sorry, I should explain. Each gang has their, let's just call it, their thing. These guys call themselves the Hoods. But none of that should bother you. As far as you're concerned, they're meat. Okay, on you go.
The director would show Cash exactly how he expected the second chance to go, and urge him to kill as many hoodlums as gratuitously as he could if he ever wanted to see freedom again. With no other obvious ways to gain his freedom, and deep inside dangerous territory, or simply because the request appealed to Cash's own psychosis, he would continue to brutally kill his way through the Hoods' turf, and eventually reach Carcer Mark Mall, where he would once again need to use stealth and violence to make his way inside, via a disposal chute.
Okay, there are some more of these shitheads hanging around the exit. Give me some grade A, honest-to-God gore, and you'll be buzzed through the door.
Cash would next find himself in the dark back streets of the Hood's territory, and through instruction from Starkweather, find and use a crowbar to continue along the merry path of nightmares still ahead of him.
You're doing fine, Cash, just fine. We're getting some great material here. Keep going. You're gonna have to find something to bust that padlock.
Cash would fairly effortlessly continue his disposal of many Hood's gangsters, and eventually find himself locked into a one-on-one fight against another crowbar-wielding maniac, with yet more intervention by Starkweather, or goons he'd paid off beforehand. Cash would also find even more Hoods inside the Carcer City Library, and efficiently dispatch of every single ne'er-do-well standing in his path, before finally being faced with just how much power his guide held over each chapter in his bloody journey, when he was confronted by the private military organization paid for by Starkweather, Cerberus.
Get ready, boys. He's coming.
I'm hearing it.
Okay, you limp dick. Let's give Mr. Starkweather a show to remember. Move it!
Abducted, manhandled, and transported to the Denton junkyard, James Earl Cash would only just be beginning the director's mad game of endless cat and mouse, and having already killed enough hoods to satisfy Starkweather, he would next be tasked with killing members of an entirely different Carcer City gang, the Skins. Racist, white supremacist lunatics who controlled the junkyard, the Skins were a step up in terms of organization from the Hoods, and would even be under the impression that Cash himself was of mixed race, which, whether true or not, only added to their desire to kill him. Starting from one end of the junkyard, Cash would systematically cut, choke, and beat his way through the Skins in his path, and though a bit more of a challenge for the born-again murderer than the Hoods, they too would one by one fall in brutal, often horrifying ways.
Okay, so I lied. We haven't quite wrapped this gig up. But hey, you're having fun, right? There's a double gate that leads on through to our next location. Find it. Careful. There's a bigot guarding the gate. If he sees you, you call his cheery buddies.
Not satisfied with merely gore and violence, the director would also continue to sprinkle in obstacles for Cash to overcome, which likely served to simply slow him down and or offer additional opportunities for Cash to murder someone on camera. Partway through the junkyard, Starkweather would even force Cash to locate an electric release switch to open the gates blocking his path, which suggests that once again, even in this part of the city, the director held some amount of either direct electronic influence, or, more likely, had paid for cooperation from the gangs, or his own Cerberus operatives.
You didn't think I'd let you out that easily, did you? It's an electric lock. Find the release switch.
Becoming quickly bored of the Skins as Cash's target, the director would continue to guide Cash through his parade of death and debauchery with instructions to finish off the remaining gangsters as he neared the end of the junkyard.
These Skins are boring me, dumbass supremacist bastards. Always blaming others for their inadequacies. Butcher them, Cash. Cut them up, beat them down, and choke the fucking life out of them. Oh man, that was good. Ha ha! The gate's open! Go on, get out of here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, das ist gut, ja.
This shit seems content to watch porn and avoid all the action. If he won't switch it off himself, we'll have to do it for him.
Oh, that's just friggin' great! The fuse is fried again!
He would also, once again, place confusing and often elaborate barriers in Cash's path, such as possibly, or in our opinion likely, having parts of the junkyard blocked with heavy metal refrigerators, just within the reach of large cranes with magnets capable of lifting them. As if expecting Cash to use such a machine as part of his plan wasn't enough, he would even deliberately leave the crane unfueled, and have the fuel used as part of an ambush by the Skins.
A crane. Well, what do you reckon, Cash?
Don't let him out of here! Move it! Move it!
Eventually, though, Cash would manage to navigate his way past, or more accurately through, several dozen Skins hoodlums, and twice be forced to use a crane's magnet to continue navigating the junkyard, until he was once again confronted by Cerberus.
Fucking food, enough bullshitting. Give him fucking food. Oh, fuck. This guy fucking stinks.
listen up. Eddie, it's time to get out there and nail that bastard. War dogs? Yeah!
This time, the private military operatives would deliver Cash to the Carcer City Zoo, where yet another new group of psychotic killers was waiting for him, commanded by one of Starkweather's personal employees. The War Dogs, a group of ex-military hunters and so-called survivalists who had taken up residence in and around the Darkwoods district and the Carcer Zoo, were led by a man known as Ramirez, whose own history with Starkweather is of some contention, but who without a doubt was taking orders and therefore payment from the director. Ramirez would be tasked with using his war dogs to hunt Cash down, as it became clear that Cash's own survival in this long-term game was entirely down to the man's bloody ambition and sheer effectiveness.
These breaks call themselves the War Dogs, real dickless, gung-ho losers. There are some doors over at the other side of this location that will get your sorry hide out of here. Oh, hell, that wasn't in the script. Honest, Cash, they're making it up as they go along, I swear.
Cash would stalk and slice his way through the War Dogs one at a time, and eventually come upon Starkweather's next twisted stunt in the form of one of his family members being held hostage. While it remains unclear exactly who these family members were to Cash, given his reactions and later events in the night, it seems safe to assume they were in his close inner family, possibly brothers, ex-wives, sisters, or any other relation that would sufficiently catch Cash's attention.
Hold up, Cash. You and your family weren't exactly close, am I right? It's just that I thought it would be nice to have a surprise reunion. But these War Dogs didn't see it my way, and they've taken matters into their own hands. They're using them as bait, Cash. Bait. I know. I can hardly believe it myself. Each time they spot you, these War Dogs are going to execute one of your beloved family.
It remains a matter of some dispute as to just how many of his family Cash was able to save from their confinement at the zoo, but what all sources do agree on is it was at least one. Who exactly this one was remains as unclear as any of their identities, but whoever it was, it seems entirely likely that their fates were sealed the moment they'd been abducted, as even if they had been freed by Cash, they would still have had to navigate through miles of dangerous gang territory in the dead of night. Eventually, though, Cash would reach the end of his unplanned visit to the Carcer City Zoo when he was yet again himself abducted by Cerberus operatives on orders from Starkweather.
You just won't fucking die, will you?
Just as he'd done with the skins, despite their obvious differences in perspectives, Ramirez would yet again begin preparing another group of killers in Carcer to hunt and kill Cash for the director's amusement. This time, the Innocents. The Innocents were originally composed of the subgroup known as the Skulls, or Scullies, who themselves were mostly comprised of Latino goths, gangsters, and even Satanists, who operated collectively out of the East Los Alamos district of Carcer. By this time, however, they had also been supplemented by a second subgroup known as the Babyfaces, who were mostly very large, overweight perverts, who were specifically hired by Starkweather to add muscle to the gang. For Starkweather's game, however, they would simultaneously serve as the hunters and the hunted, in their battle of instinctual wits against James Earl Cash's considerable talents as a murdering psychopath.
You, get out to the graveyard. You, I want you up there. And I want you to follow him over to the mall. Now fucking move!
So, how are we doing, Cash? Enjoying it so far? I thought you could do with a little R&R, so I've arranged a special screening. Just for you. It's work in progress, but I think you'll appreciate it. I've hidden a tape and a video camera in the mall. Find them. By the way, these guys are packing heat, so you might want to find a gun for yourself.
Cash would next be dropped by Cerberus at the Carcer City Mall on Innocent's turf, and for the first time in the violent endeavor, be encouraged not to simply be as stealthy as possible, but to actively arm himself, and have shootouts with the dangerous, psychotic Latino gangsters. Though in reality simply playing through the next stage of the director's sick game, it would be framed this time as an opportunity for supposed rest and relaxation, with Starkweather instructing Cash to locate both a video camera and tape for his own private screening.
You must understand, Cash. I could never let them go. Where were your family when you were facing your final moments in the chamber anyway? You've left your old life, your old self behind. I'm all the family you need now.
Unsurprisingly, this would once again prove to be merely entertainment for the filmmaker psychopath, as despite saving at least one family member from the War Dogs, that very same family member was later abducted yet again and murdered by the Innocents. Though we have no direct documentation proving this, it is our conviction that this was, yet again, entirely staged and planned by Lionel Starkweather himself, using Cerberus or Ramirez to facilitate the ground-level details. But whatever the case, James Earl Cash would now be thoroughly motivated, not just by the prospect of escape, but possibly the prospect of revenge. As though Starkweather's murder of his family, or attempts at inducing Stockholm Syndrome in Cash weren't enough, his next task would be to free and guide a tramp from his holding cell in East Los Albos to the district cemetery, with the director refusing to open any gates in Cash's way, should the tramp not be visible next to him, alive and kicking.
I've got a little surprise for you. You look lonely, so I got you some company. Unfortunately, the Innocents thought better of it and locked them up. You're gonna have to bust them out. Well, what do you think of your new friend? You look good together, Cash. Really, you do. I'll only open any gates if he's with you, alive and well. Now, get going. Entertain me.
After safely guiding the tramp through Innocent's territory, his fate would be left unknown, and Cash would find himself at the Carcer City Chem Factory, where the gang had their headquarters. With the usual set of obstacles and necessary killings, Cash would make his way through the building and likely begin taking his time with each kill, as he relished the thought of exacting revenge on those who had executed his family.
Time for a little overtime. Make your way through the factory. The loading bay's your only way in. Aw, damn it. The lift's screwed again. You're gonna have to go down to the basement. There's a circuit breaker down there that'll get the lift working. I don't think we made too many friends. Hell, I like you. That's my leading man, attaboy. See you with some beers outside.
Eventually, though, as Cash should have been getting used to, he would reach the end of yet another arm in Starkweather's maze, and be picked up by the Cerberus agents waiting for him to be delivered to his next and final destination.
What the fuck?
Get to bed. Now. You heard the man.
The senator also visited the Darkwoods Penitentiary, which hosts more than 1,000 inmates from all over the country. The prison's modern facilities include spacious cells for the inmates. The exceptionally well-staffed hospital is equipped for emergencies, as well as routine health checks. Adjacent to row 1, the electric chair room is where death sentences are carried out.
This time, instead of taking Cash to yet another neighborhood of the rundown city which was overrun by violent gangsters, Cerberus would bring him to a place he was already very familiar with, Darkwoods Penitentiary, where quite literally, the inmates were now running the asylum.
Right here. Drop him.
The lunatics have taken over the asylum, Cash. The only way to reason with these gibbering idiots is with a stick and a gun. I want you to kill the hunter patrolling the tower walkway and bring his body to the guard room.
Oh, I want to touch him. Baby, I'm so sorry.
There's a hunter in the next room through the mesh door. Pack him up and I'll buzz open the next set of doors for you.
Since Cash had last seen the penitentiary, though, it had undergone some noticeable changes. Sometime likely in that same November, but prior to Cash's initial abduction, the asylum had been taken over in a violent riot, which left the prison staff dead and the prisoners the new wardens. They would form a loosely organized group soon after, calling themselves the Smileys, consisting entirely of actually insane, degenerate murderers, and some of them, through unknown means, would even make contact with Starkweather himself, where they volunteered to participate in his snuff film ring, though likely not as subjects.
Some of these nutjobs have bricked themselves into the tower. You'll have to find a way to blast your way in.
Cash would eventually make his way to the guard tower, kill the Smiley he'd been ordered to, and lug his body all the way to the guard room, but soon after he would be ordered to abandon all his weapons and continue. If he had any instincts whatsoever, he should have figured this was the beginning of the end.
There's a good boy. Now, drop all your weapons and move on.
Making his way to the prison's cell blocks, Cash would next be ordered to not just kill several Smileys if he wanted to advance, but kill them as graphically as possible to truly satisfy Starkweather's bloodlust. Still motivated by either prospective freedom or the chance to kill Starkweather himself, even if he had no idea what his name was yet, Cash would oblige and catch numerous Smileys off guard, in order to brutally and savagely execute them, all for the camera.
Jesus, Cash, you're chewing through these guys like you were popping bubble wrap. Head over to the end of the cell block. I got a surprise for you.
Look like enough to fog. Fog!
Okay, Cash, you performed brilliantly. Don't worry, I've got plenty more Wonderland fun lined up for you.
Arriving at the prison showers block, Cash would be presented with perhaps his most surreal objective yet, to follow and catch an elusive man dressed as a white rabbit, a la Alice in Wonderland.
You're my big, ugly Alice, so go on, follow the white rabbit.
Perhaps seeing his own freedom just beyond this hurdle, Cash would once again relentlessly obey the director's orders, and hunt the rabbit man across the shower block, until eventually reaching a room where the rabbit had supposedly left a gift, which almost immediately began to fill with armed Smileys, all looking to kill him.
Mr. Rabbit has left you a gift.
You did well, very well, but every film has an ending, and this here's yours.
What can I say? You are a good leading man. The audience will love you. Don't expect any royalty checks where you're going, though.
Though Starkweather had intended for Cash to finally die in this room, instead, the persistent psychopath would eliminate every Smiley's hoodlum gunning for him, and the backup Cerberus agents meant to kill him if the Smileys failed. And with that, James was finally, for the first time since his resurrection, a free man once more. At least, sort of.
Hey, you ain't dead! He ain't dead! Oh shit! I've got the keys!
He would find and kill the rabbit and continue arming himself with Cerberus equipment to better stand a chance against the military operatives, and after securing his life, the keys, and enough ammo to continue, he would finally leave the Darkwoods Penitentiary for presumably the last time. But Lionel Starkweather would not tolerate his plans being disrupted that easily, and following Cash's escape from the Darkwoods Penitentiary, he would personally assign his employee, Ramirez, the task of tracking Cash down and bringing him to heel. With plenty of experience in tracking targets with ruthless precision, Ramirez would quickly track Cash down and subdue him, with plans to play a violent game of hide-and-seek in order to show Cash who was boss, and make him pay for wasting his and Starkweather's time.
Ramirez! You let Cash slip his leash. Bring him to heel. Failure isn't an option. Now go.
Where do you think you're going, man? Huh? Huh? What the fuck? You think you're tough? Think you're tough? I'll rip your fucking head off! Don't you wanna play anymore? You like hide and seek? You like hide and fucking seek? Well, we're coming for you, asshole.
What's the matter, little boy?
Ready or not.
It's our turn now.
Run! Run!
However, Ramirez would make the fatal mistake of setting Cash loose in yet another environment where his talents of stealth and murder could be put to good use, and soon after releasing him for their game, he would find most of his soldiers killed, and begin to panic as Cash inevitably made his way towards the War Dog's leader. Cash would eventually locate and kill Ramirez personally, along with killing numerous other War Dogs in the process, before fleeing the Darkwoods district entirely, and being confronted by another unlikely face on his way out.
It looks like this goes all the way to the top. I can't trust anyone, least of all the police, and time's running out. I've got to get the one piece of evidence that will expose Starkweather without a shadow of a doubt. Footage and testimony of a man who was executed by the state 5 hours ago.
James Earl Cash, found guilty and sentenced to death, has been on death row for the past 3 years and was executed last night.
Get in, you idiot! Get in!
Pull over! Pull over! Who are you? I've seen your face before.
Get off of me! I'm a reporter! I was at your execution!
Keep talking.
I've been following Starkweather's operation for months.
Who's Starkweather?
The guy that's been talking you through this whole circus of death? Look, I've got all I need to expose that sick bastard, but he's definitely on to me now. So I have to get back to my apartment, collect my material, and get out of town before I become another one of Starkweather's extras.
You can bring him down? This Starkweather?
Absolutely. This is gonna make my career.
Okay, let's go.
Huh?
To your apartment. Drive!
Confronted with his first real ally since his ordeal of death began, Cash would quickly surmise that the journalist had been present at his execution, and skeptical of its validity ever since, with evidence supposedly pointing to the involvement of a famous movie director, Lionel Starkweather. Finally given a name for who to track down, Cash and the unnamed journalist would make their way through the Central District, where Cash would sneak or slaughter his way through dozens of corrupt police officers, working for the corrupt police chief, Gary Schaefer, whose cooperation had all been bought and paid for by Starkweather himself.
We've lost.
What? Are you fucking...
Oh, shut up and get some of your boys to take care of it. Don't file the arrest report. Don't kill him either. Send both to me.
Hey, remember who you're talking to, you son of...
Listen, you fuck. It's your job to clean up this city's mess. That's what you get paid for.
Shit.
Okay, pull over here.
But it's another block or two to my apartment.
Just shut up and stick with me if you want to stay alive.
Cash and the journalist would eventually make their way to her apartment in the Central Carcer District and find yet more corrupt police officers under Schaefer perusing the building, attempting to locate her evidence on Starkweather for confiscation, and with orders to shoot and kill either of them on sight.
My place is upstairs. Here.
You coming or what?
But Cash would be far more interested in exacting his revenge personally, and instruct the journalist to take whatever evidence she had on Starkweather's case and take it out of town as a backup for Starkweather's downfall, should his direct approach fail. After sending the journalist on her way, he would sneak his way out of her apartment and continue pushing his way through the waves of corrupt police officers patrolling the streets.
Everything I need is in that box under the table.
Good. Take it and get out of town.
But you're not coming with me?
I'm going to deal with Starkweather personally. Thank him for my second chance. You're my backup if I don't make it. Have a nice life.
Cash would make his way through Central and attempt to use the city's subway network in order to reach Starkweather's manor in the Wapona Hills residential district, but be stopped once again by the CCPD and SWAT teams operating under Schaefer, when they manually powered the subway down in an attempt to confine and catch Cash. Using ingenuity or sheer violent determination, Cash would eventually power the subway back on after dispatching of all the police officers hunting him down, and take the train to Carcer Point Station, where he would have to make the rest of his journey on foot, and traverse the Carcer Point train yard, also being patrolled by the CCPD officers on Starkweather's payroll.
This is dispatch. Seal the perimeter. Snipers have been ordered to move in.
Shit! We got plenty big trouble!
We better go see what's going on. Roger, we're at the station.
This is Charlie Leader. Power has been shut off. Repeat, power is off.
Cash would violently and with frightening efficiency manage to make his way through the train yard, and in the process kill numerous CCPD officers looking to take him down. He would eliminate so many of the officers that they would personally begin taking an interest in not just catching him, but making him suffer for killing cops, and as Cash pushed his way to the end of the yard, he would once again be ambushed by a squad of SWAT officers fed up with his reign of terror, and prepared to put him down regardless of what their sergeant or Starkweather had ordered.
Punk! Just give me an excuse to waste you!
Dispatch! Dispatch! We've got the bastard! Put your fucking hands up! Shoot that cop killer son of a bitch!
Starkweather, however, would not leave Cash's fate entirely in the hands of the incompetent CCPD, and instead hire his personal group of mercenaries in Cerberus to track Cash down at the train yard and take him into custody alive for further torturing. Luckily for Cash, though, he would be bagged and tagged and delivered to exactly where he'd been heading, Starkweather's estate in the Wapona Hills, where the journalist he met earlier was already publicly confronting the director by broadcasting outside his home.
But Mr. Starkweather refuses to comment on these allegations. At this point, it is unclear as to whether or not he will ever be allowed to direct again. This is...
You know what? I don't give a fuck what Starkweather wants. Maybe today I kill you, maybe not. Kill the camera. What was that? Go check it out. Maybe it is your day. Shit! What the fuck is that? Support! Repeat! Send in! Oh shit!
Cerberus would drop Cash off not far from the estate grounds, and likely where they planned to either execute or torture him. But around this time, the escape of another of Starkweather's toys would prompt the otherwise professional killers to abandon Cash to save themselves. Not that it would do them much good. Cash would use the much-needed distraction created by this fellow psychotic killer as an opportunity to sneak closer and closer to Starkweather's mansion, and eventually, he would dispatch every Cerberus officer standing in his way, and make his way inside of the estate, where he planned to find and kill Starkweather personally.
Bring him down! Starkweather wants them both dead. I got my sector covered. Nobody's coming through this way.
What followed was a game of wits and murder, with Cash hunting down every Cerberus operative he found inside the mansion, killing them, and liberating them of their weapons to make each next target a bit easier to overcome. Cash would slaughter even the supposed leader of Cerberus's operations in the area, and take his key in order to access Starkweather's personal quarters, and despite every attempt by the military personnel to stop Cash's advance, he would eventually make his way to the elevator, which would take him to the director's office. On his way up, however, Cash would be confronted by the entity who had thus far been responsible for inadvertently helping him, and who had arguably been placed into a similar position as Cash originally was: Pigsy. The difference was that Cash, while clearly a psychotic murderer, still had most of his mental faculties intact, and could at least articulate himself with some degree of competence, while his new friend in Pigsy was far more deranged, and believe it or not, aggressive. Cash would be forced to fight Pigsy one-on-one throughout the Starkweather estate, and find the man far more difficult to kill than anyone he'd encountered that night, or possibly, ever. Using the entity's clear derangement and lack of strategy, Cash would eventually lure Pigsy onto a metal grate at the top of one of Starkweather's elaborate staircases, and when the weight of the grate finally gave way, liberate Pigsy of his trusted chainsaw, and shortly afterwards, his arms too.
No more!
With Pigsy dealt with, Cash would make his way to Starkweather's office, and once more be confronted by the remaining Cerberus operatives, who had been guarding the director themselves, but thanks to his quick reaction time, managed to flee down the stairs before they could gun him down.
Send him to hell! Go on!
Cash would then hunt down the remaining Cerberus soldiers one at a time, or perhaps even guns blazing, and finally find himself ready to confront the director himself, using Pigsy's chainsaw to violently bust his way inside of Starkweather's private, secluded office. Though Mr. Starkweather would plead with Cash for his own life and attempt to gun down his creation using a revolver, Cash would quite easily manage to avoid the madman's shots and finally catch him, showing the director just how grateful he was for the second chance he'd been given by slicing open his stomach with a chainsaw, and finally finished him off by slamming the machine right into his head.
Cash? I made you!
Following Starkweather's death, James Earl Cash would presumably flee the mansion and by all accounts never be seen or heard from again, at least not under his real name or face. What exactly became of Cash following this Starkweather incident remains unclear, but according to all those we interviewed with supposed knowledge of what transpired, his involvement remains completely unverified by anyone. And as far as the paper trail is concerned, he had never been seen again following his original execution. But we all know the truth, don't we, Mr. Schaefer?
Acclaimed movie maker Lionel Starkweather has been found dead today, along with several of his bodyguards, at his estate at the Wapona Hills residential district. In what investigators are calling a bloody vendetta, an unknown assailant infiltrated the compound, killing Starkweather, but more interestingly, leading police to the site of a snuff film ring being run from the estate's confines. Linked to this ring is Carcer City's own police chief, Gary Schaefer, whose lawyer stated that he intends to plead not guilty.
Very little is actually known about James Earl Cash's personality before he was forced to play the mad games of director Lionel Starkweather. However, based on his actions during the highly publicized massacres, we can make some assumptions. Cash was clearly quite easily capable of murder, and more than likely was already convicted of murder, possibly on multiple counts, leading up to his execution. He was belligerent, violent, and actively hostile to people around him, fighting every step of the way, whether justified or not, such as actively resisting his supposed execution even after being on death row for 3 years. Cash was evidently a brutal and heavily dissociated individual who was capable of some of the most horrible acts imaginable, but despite this, he was not completely mindless, and demonstrated on more than one occasion that he possessed some modicum of sanity, which he managed to cling onto even inside Darkwood's penitentiary. He was also clearly capable of empathy to some degree, and seemed to genuinely care for his close family, enough to both visibly and angrily mourn them, and embark on a quest of revenge in part to avenge their deaths. Cash also seemed to, at least during the events described tonight, avoid killing those who were innocent or non-violent themselves, such as the journalist who helped expose Starkweather, though it's also entirely possible she was only spared due to her potential utility to him. It's also worth noting that we could not obtain any details on the murder, or possibly murderers, which originally landed him on death row, but it seems more than likely, whoever it was, they were not a gangster from any of the various gangs he encountered while being filmed by the director, as he seemed to have little or no knowledge of any of them. Overall, Cash was a relentless, dangerous, and exceedingly violent man, who despite everything he'd done, still seemed to have a sense of twisted morality behind his abhorrent actions. He was quiet, determined, and a proven survivalist who would kill anyone who stood in his way without remorse, while maintaining enough of his humanity to understand exactly what he was doing every time he killed, arguably making him even worse. As we have mentioned before tonight, we do not know what James Earl Cash did to originally end up on death row, other than murder at least one person. However, the events in November 2003 which saw Lionel Starkweather exposed for his perversions post-mortem offer a glimpse into just how brutal Cash was capable of being, and unlike his original crimes, these are well documented. Over the course of just one night, James Earl Cash murdered approximately 500 people across Carcer City with his own bare hands, or occasionally a firearm. The vast majority of these people were from the gangs the Hoods, the Skins, the War Dogs, the Innocents, and the Smileys, but also dozens of military operatives out of Cerberus, and officers of the Carcer City Police Department, including SWAT team members. In addition, he could also be considered responsible for various other small crimes which he committed while playing the director's sick games, but given the nature of his forced participation, and the scope of murders committed simply in hopes of escaping, these infractions hardly seem worth mentioning. With all of this in mind, to successfully kill 500 of the city's most dangerous and violent criminals over the course of just one night is absolutely unprecedented, and in our view just goes to show that whatever Cash did do to end up on death row originally, he likely deserved to be there, regardless of your views on the punishment, and that Lionel Starkweather may have chosen his final film's leading man a bit too well. Just how twisted can the mind of a truly madman get? We'd like to think that tonight we've offered a glimpse at the answer, and perhaps shown you that even the most evil people can still have a layer of humanity buried deep, deep below. Whether it's Liberty City, Vice City, or Carcer City, America is a dangerous place, folks, but if you do find yourself in Carcer, consider doing yourself a favor and move. Thank you for joining us for this very special spooky Halloween spectacular, or whatever, and we hope you stay tuned to the channel for our next episode as we visit a mysterious city we've never heard of before, New York. We'll see you next time for the next exciting episode of Criminal History, and until then, I'm your host, Guiness Walker, and thank you so much for watching.